Support comes from Mosby Building Arts. Mosby transforms unfinished basements into comfortable spaces for relaxing, entertaining, and spending time together. Make the most of your square footage. July basement sale. Details at callmosby.com.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is Politically Speaking.
Missouri's primary election is less than a month away. Voters will have to decide what party candidates they want running in the November election, along with the fate of several proposed constitutional amendments. But for some candidates in largely Democratic or Republican districts, the primary election is the one that counts. The race for the next state senator for Missouri's 4th district is one of those races. In fact, there isn't even a Republican running. Gina Mitten hopes to be the Democrat who emerges victorious on August 4th. On this episode of Politically Speaking, the former Missouri House Representative speaks on why she decided to run for state senate and why she's the best Democrat for the job instead of opponent Steve Butts. Let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, the definitive show about Missouri politics.
Let's go back to some of those policies, to that peace and prosperity that we had some 4 to 5 years ago.
Everywhere is Democrat country once this Democrat's been there.
There are a lot of things in Washington that are very bipartisan, including some bills that I've already gotten passed.
And I think it works best when you can see both sides, but you have to pick one, and I firmly align with the Republicans.
But certainly, I think if she's running against one of the crazy dudes, certainly it's going to be a lot easier.
But I'll take wisdom in age and a few missteps in oral over somebody who has no substance.
I believe that you represent the party's values and you move forward, and that's what I have done.
And welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, St. Louis Public Radio's State House and Politics reporter, Sarah Kellogg. Sitting across from me is my co-host. He is St. Louis Public Radio's political correspondent.
Jason Rosenbaum.
That's 2 St. Louis episodes in a row. I'm really happy to be here. Our guest today, she is the former House representative for the 83rd District of the Missouri House, and she is running to be the senator for Missouri's 4th Senate District.
Gina Mitten.
Thank you so much. Let's get right into it. For listeners who might not pay too much attention to the Missouri House, as well as you haven't been in it for a minute, tell us who you are and how you got into Missouri politics.
Oh, well, I'm Gina Mitten. I guess I'll just go backwards. So my last political job was being the state representative for the 83rd District, or what I used to call the Fightin' 83rd. And that district ran from the Hill to Rock Hill. It was a city-county district, and I was first elected in 2012, served 4 terms. I left due to term limits at the end of 2020, so during COVID. Probably the most newsworthy thing that folks might remember from my tenure is being the ranking Democrat on the committee that investigated former Governor Greitens. I also served 5 of my 8 years in Democratic caucus leadership.
What were some of the reasons that you decided to run for the House in the first place?
Oh, there were several reasons. I mean, first it was an open seat, and actually what really happened is in the 2012 redistricting, it was something that I had been interested in. Didn't really expect it to happen when it did. During the 2012 redistricting, though, there was a district created that had no incumbent living in it. I reached out to both of the potential people to run in it. That was then Susan Carlson and Stacey Newman, and I was willing to support either of them if they wanted to run in the 83rd, and neither one wanted to. So that's how it all sort of came about in 2012.
The running gag was the border between the 83rd and what was Stacey Newman's district? The 87th, I think?
I think.
It was right in front of my house.
That's right.
That gag is no longer applicable because of redistricting. I'm really sad about that. One of the other things that I don't think we talked about before, you were in Richmond Heights city government for a while.
Oh, yes.
What did you learn from that experience, and how did it make you more prepared to be in the legislature?
Well, I think any policy-making experience is always going to make you be more prepared. It helps you understand how to work the relationships and find ways to come together to solve problems, even though you might not, particularly in a municipality like that, you might not be so politically aligned. I've been an activist and involved politically since long before I was old enough to vote. So switching from sort of activism to policymaking, the city council was sort of the job that transferred that skill set. And I think it absolutely prepared me for going to Jefferson City and navigating the the landscape there.
You're now vying to be the next senator from Missouri's 4th district. Why did you decide to run?
Well, one of the biggest reasons is I am unequivocally pro-choice, and I always have been. I served with Representative Butts in 2019 and 20, and I was there when he voted yes on a bill that, had it not been changed by the Senate, would have been a trigger ban without any exceptions. And the 4th district in 2024, nearly 80% of this district voted in favor of Amendment 3 to restore reproductive rights or abortion rights. And 70% voted for the Democratic candidate for governor. So it's arguably a more pro-choice district than it is a Democratic district. And I feel that it's important that the folks of the 4th district be represented by somebody that unequivocally champions those rights and respects them.
I was going to ask this later when we talked about Amendment 3, but, Butts was recently a guest on the show, and he talked about how he was for the old Amendment 3, and he's now against the new Amendment 3. So ultimately, those votes would have been the same. So do you think that's a fair assessment to call yourself the only pro-choice candidate?
Oh, absolutely. Again, and look, so the 2019 vote was that left the House on a third read, which, again, if the Senate had not passed it, it's what would have gone to the governor. It was a complete trigger ban, and it was an if-then bill. If the trigger ban's not legal, then a heartbeat bill, then so forth and so on. He did vote no when it came back from the Senate, and he has really yet to provide a decent explanation about that. But that's not the only reproductive rights bill that's come down the path during his tenure. There was a bill in 2025 that he voted yes on that also was damaging to reproductive rights, and then in 2026 he voted present on. So if your record on this issue is, the way that I would describe it, is wobbly at best, it's not zero, but it's certainly not the 100% record that I have. I have never, ever voted to compromise reproductive rights in my whole career.
I think that there's a geographical issue in this district, and that is that this district has been represented by somebody from the city for as long as it's existed. It is now going towards an inevitable conclusion by 2032 that I think the county will be a majority population, but it's not quite there yet. It's like 60-40. And there could be a lot of city residents who are just not super comfortable with their state senator being from the county. What do you say to them?
Well, I suppose that I can understand it to some extent, although I've been represented by a city resident for the past, 14 plus years. And the other difference, though, is that, Representative Butts have never represented the county. I have represented the city, and I think I represented the city well. I believe if my city constituents had been unhappy with me, they would have primaried me or challenged me or at least let me know that they were not happy. And that never happened during my 8 years in the House. In fact, when I came, I guess it was last year, and started announcing to local groups that I was running, there were several neighborhood groups where people actually stood up and clapped during my announcement. And these are folks that hadn't seen me since 2019, since before COVID. So I have a proven voting record supporting city needs. And I don't see that as much of an issue as maybe some others do. And again, it's a 60-40 district, and those numbers can kind of change depending on which election. Sometimes county will have a higher turnout than the city.
You keep going.
What would you do differently than the current senator, Carla May?
I don't know what I would do differently than the current Senator Carla May. I mean, I think that if you're running for an office, you need to run for the office under your own skin and under your own terms.
Do you think she's done a good job?
I think I appreciate her voting record by and large. There are certainly some votes that I don't agree with, and that's okay. I think that's to be expected. Other than that, I can't. As a constituent of hers, I don't have particular personal complaints.
In your campaign call to action, kind of more or less on your website, it says that, she, meaning you, needs your help to defeat a MAGA politician and win on August 4th. Are you referring to Butts in this?
I am.
Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, listen, if you're going to vote with Republicans, the amount that he votes with Republicans, I do think that it's fair. Representative Butts, granted, it's been quite a while, he has given, he gave money to Ed Martin. in a debt service congressional race back in 2012. I don't know any Democrats that have ever given money to somebody like Ed Martin. His campaign is now being financed by folks like Rex Singfeld. I do think that that's a fair treatment of given his voting record and his donor base.
So I have not gotten any negative mailers yet, though I expect to. And what I expect him to target is your service as an administrative law judge, which was the subject of a very, I don't want to say it's high profile, but it was high profile in the administrative law judge world, because it was not only you, but Ryan Asbridge, who was also part of that after his salary, I think, was deducted because of his military service. He's going to say, you didn't take the job seriously, you did a bad job, therefore why should you be a senator? I feel like you deserve an opportunity to respond to that, because that is clearly going to be the thing that he's going to attack you on.
Well, first and foremost, I think that it's interesting that that's the thing, that he's sort of hanging his hat on. You can look at my voting record, and I think that I have a very strong voting record to represent the constituents of the 4th Senatorial District as a strong Democrat. As to that job, look, the existing law has a measure of due process. I was fired. I was terminated from that job without any due process. So given that's the parameters of the situation, I think that having those roles not have due process or to be what the state now claims are at-will employees, that is a huge problem, particularly for workers. I am a pro-worker Democrat. I always have been, always will be. I've lived paycheck to paycheck, et cetera. So if ALJs or workers' compensation judges are at-will employees, that means they can be fired for any or no reason at all, meaning you can issue one opinion or one award that upsets the governor or the governor's donors or the other party or the party in power, and you can be terminated. That is not a responsible way to run those judges. And we see this going on already at the federal level with the, Congress has set up these organizations that are supposed to be bipartisan and are supposed to have some due process and not be able to be let go at the whim of an executive. And I think that those roles should have the same, should be in the same category.
Let's get into issues. We're past the 1-year anniversary of the tornado that hit St. Louis, primarily North St. Louis. What will you do as a state senator to continue to aid the city as it recovers?
Well, look, it comes down to dollars, and I think that's the big issue. This area, this region, we send a lot of our tax dollars, we send a boatload of tax dollars to Jefferson City, and we do not get back what I think that we should be getting back to. I don't think that city or the county, for that matter, are respected by Republicans in Jefferson City, and I will continue to fight for those values as I always have. Again, I spent 8 years in the House representing both the city and the county, and always fought for funding and to, again, just be treated like the economic engine that we are. And I think that that's one of my big beefs, so to speak, is that we are an economic engine, and yet it seems that both the city and the county have targets on their backs for whether it's social issues, financial issues. You could go across the whole spectrum of political issues. Right now, I think that the city is, I guess you could say, being picked on more. But where the city goes, the county goes. I think that anybody that thinks that just because you don't live in the city, you don't care about the city is misguided at best, because it's crucially important to all of the region's residents that the city maintains its status or increases its status and engages in the economic development that it has a history of engaging in and continues to do so.
Do you think that really the state can do more financially for tornado victims, or is it going to really be a federal response? Because I know that the mayor is trying to get community development, block grant, disaster recovery funds, which could be in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's probably more than the state could provide. But do you think the state could do more with that as a backdrop or a caveat?
Yeah, I do think that. Here's one of the problems is, for instance, last year, I think it was 2025 session, the Republicans in Jefferson City decided to do away with the capital gains tax. That ended up being, we're, I think, at least $500 million, maybe $600 million right now. Can you imagine how far some of those dollars could have gone to help the city in the tornado relief, or the city generally, or the city with its infrastructure? So, yes, I do believe that the state can do more. I understand that there are financial crisis, or that we have a sort of a cliff looming right now. And yet, against the backdrop of that cliff, all that we hear out of the Republican side of the aisle is cut taxes, cut taxes, cut taxes. And I vehemently disagree with that tactic, and I think that the city absolutely can be doing more. The state could be doing more. And let's try and put the shoe on the other foot. Say this tornado had hit, well, we did have a tornado that hit the Joplin area several years ago, and there was dollars to help that.
Yeah.
We should have those dollars. Again, I think the city of St. Louis deserves and affords the same respect.
Well, the state did respond at least a little bit, and they gave
Yes.
$100 million in additional, I believe it was 38, I think, with the supplemental. I'm trying to remember, but it was definitely, over $100 million to the state. Is that enough? What else would you want to see the state do?
Well, I think clearly it's not enough because we still have folks living with, folks whose roofs haven't been repaired, and there's still infrastructure needs there. And again, we can start with dollars. I don't think that it has to be limited to dollars, but come help, come help.
You would not only represent a part of St. Louis City like we talked about, but also a part of St. Louis County. How do you intend to do both?
The same way as I did for 8 years in the House. I have done that. My county district the county parts of the 83rd included most of Richmond Heights, all of Maplewood, all of Rock Hill, most of Brentwood, and some parts of Webster. So, again, I think that if I had not done an effective job representing both the city and the county residents, somebody would have challenged me in a primary, and that did not happen. I had a primary my first election, and all three of the next elections, I had one Republican and nobody else. Representative Butts cannot say that.
Are there different priorities you have for St. Louis City versus St. Louis County?
I would say generally no. I think that the region needs, we need to maintain a strong economic development base, a strong base of supporting ourselves and honestly supporting the state to some extent. So no, I think that the needs are pretty much the same on both sides of that line.
We need to take a quick break, but we'll be right back.
Support comes from Mosby Building Arts, creating laundry rooms with improved storage, workspace, and everyday function for one of the home's most used spaces. Inspiration at callmosby.com.
And we're back on Politically Speaking. Our guest today is Gina Mitten, who is running to be Missouri's next senator for the 4th State Senate District. We're going to get back right into issues, and Jason is going to start us off.
One of the big issue differences that I have ascertained between you and Representative Butts is you were opposed to a gubernatorially appointed board overseeing the St. Louis Police Department. First of all, I want to make sure that's accurate.
Well, I have said that I would never have voted for a bill that I believe is half-baked.
Okay. Why?
I think that bill was half-baked on a number of levels. First and foremost, at the timing of that bill was after the first round of primary voting had happened in the city. And I think that at that point, it was pretty clear that the odds were that Mayor Spencer was going to be our next mayor. And I think that to deny an incoming mayor what everyone would have reason to suspect would be the next mayor, any opportunity to try and work with the police department and figure things out and work collaboratively, that's just an injustice to the will of the voters. It's just an injustice generally to not allow a mayor to have any opportunity to try and fix whatever problems may have been around. And I say that, I'm not suggesting that some of the police department's complaints were not legitimate. They have some reasonable complaints, things that I do think needed to be addressed. For instance, not getting their patrol cars fixed. That's a problem. It's a real problem. But that's the first issue, is I think that, and it was passed between those two primaries and with an emergency clause. So there was no opportunity for Mayor Spencer to ever try and address and work with the police department. That's the first thing. The second thing is anybody that pays attention to city politics would remember in 2013, when it went from state control back to local control, there were all kinds of issues that had to go to the courts about liability. Who's liable for what, when, and how. Why anybody would vote in favor of a bill that didn't address something that had happened in the past, and I think that most folks would assume, and reasonably so, that there was going to be a problem moving forward, makes no sense to me. To vote yes on a bill that has clear issues that are not being addressed is a problem. And then the final thing is, I think maybe reasonably people might be able to disagree about whether or not definition of general revenue was implied or not. But one big difference is, there's a pot of cash called Rams money, and to not even address that as part of the bill, I think is short-sighted and certainly not paying attention to the details. I know it's folks don't like listening about the fact that the devil is in the details, but that's really that's the truth of the matter. And so we can talk about state takeover and that being a good policy move, but the devil is in the details. And in this bill, those details were not worked out. And frankly, I just call it a great bill to make lawyers money on the backs of taxpayers in ways that I completely disagree with.
Yeah, because when you mention about basically talking about this issue conceptually, I actually found it always odd that the mayor's office in St. Louis had direct control over the police department at all, because Richmond Heights mayor doesn't have that power, and even Sam Page doesn't have direct power over the St. Louis County Police Department. So could you make an argument that the old system, which for all intents and purposes, I understand that like it was the public safety director that had oversight, but the public safety director's appointed by the mayor. That's not really any division. Could you understand that that setup was unusual and frankly may not have been the best way to oversee the police department?
When you say the old system, I assume you're meaning when the state had control?
No.
I mean, excuse me, when the city had control?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, sure. I'm not saying that's an unreasonable argument, but is the fix to have the state come in and have complete control? I don't think that's true. I mean, we can talk about the dollars, we can talk about morale, we can talk about the staffing issues, but those are important issues. Don't get me wrong, but they're not the only issues. We now have a police department that's controlled by the state of Missouri, which means that if they want to start doing biometric data on every single person walking through the city of St. Louis, I don't know how that gets stopped. I think that scares me, honestly, that voters and taxpayers don't have any direct input or voice to how their police department is operated and what they might spend their money on or how that's going to work. That's a problem to me.
So this is the reality of where we are.
Yep.
There is a state control. And one of the other realities is that the two senators that represent the city of St. Louis effectively have veto power over the nominations, because through Senate tradition, if the nominee's home senator doesn't approve of them, then it basically kills their nomination.
Yes.
And that's going to be the case here. I remember talking with you offline about this. Since you are a St. Louis County resident, do you understand that it is going to be very odd for people to know that a St. Louis County resident has effective veto power over a board of police commissioner nominees?
Are there people that might think that's odd? Yes. I think there's also plenty of people that won't think that it's odd, as long as they feel that they're being adequately represented and that their voices are being heard. I think that's really the most important thing. Voters, residents, constituents, however you want to characterize it, we want to have a voice that is being paid attention to and heard in our elected officials. So the fact that I'm a county resident, I don't think that it impacts things. I think, again, you do your homework and you find out, you find out how the voters feel about it. I think that it's interesting that Representative Butts brings this up time and time again, when at the same time he has taken campaign contributions from the current president of the Board of Police Commissioners, which I personally find to be a conflict of interest. So if you're taking dollars from somebody that then wants to be on a board, I think that's an issue. And it doesn't matter if you're a city or county resident.
Would you have blocked any of the commissioners? Because neither Senator Roberts nor Senator May ended up doing that. And correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, wasn't that decision part of a broader agreement to change the filibuster process, and that's one of the reasons they got through?
Well, I will say the appointee approval was actually a part of getting that bill passed in the first place last year. So giving the 4th and 5th district the ability, that was what got the bill, I think, partially through. That was the Senate. And then the appointees, that was a big part of the filibuster to change the rules, but the appointees were a part of that, but it wasn't how to get that done in the first place.
Yeah. So would you have blocked any of them based on what you see now? Which we talked about this on the Butts show. It's been a complete disaster in terms of relationship between the city officials and the police commissioners. I understand that's a pejorative opinion, but there's really no way to describe it otherwise.
And I would agree with you. And I'm not going to armchair quarterback the decisions of Senators Roberts or May. I agree that my understanding is that those, we call them goobies, but those appointments were allowed through as part of a larger negotiation that had nothing to do with the City of St. Louis Police Department. I can tell you what I will do going forward, though, is the first person that I call is the mayor of St. Louis. I think that the mayor of St. Louis is somebody that needs to have a voice in how that works, and who they, and right now it's a she, feels would be adequate and appropriate people. But, again, we can talk about Don Brown is on there, and I don't know if this is true, but I'm being told that I guess police cars or patrol vehicles are being purchased or repaired there. That's another conflict of interest to me.
He's the non-voting member. I think that was an issue when his nomination came up, but he was approved. So
right.
It wasn't clearly enough, obviously. So.
Well, but again, these bargains are made. They're not made in a vacuum. So it's really, I think that it's just very difficult to say, would you have done this? How would you have reacted to this specific issue when it's actually one piece of a much broader puzzle? And that's my understanding of what happened.
I want to go back just a little bit where when asked if you would have supported the bill, you called it half-baked. Is there a version of this bill that would have been fully baked that placed the board under the police under a state board that you would have approved of?
Not at the time that it came down. I would not have voted for it at the time that it came down. At a minimum, I think that Mayor Spencer should have had an opportunity to work with the police until the end of the 2025 legislative session. Now, it may be that in January of 2026, nothing had really been resolved or worked through, and I might have had a different opinion. But again, I can't speculate on the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. I just think that given the lay of the land and the facts of the matter at the time that vote was taken, I would not have voted yes.
Does the legislature, you think, have any responsibility to do something about this board now, since they essentially caused it when it comes to maybe, the tensions over funding, or is there anything you think the legislature should do right now?
Well, I think that there's been talk about trying to better define what is meant by general revenue. Some of that could be cleaned up. I personally would like to see, again, it's complicated, and the devil is in the details. And so, we have a limited amount of time to talk about it here, and I don't want to spend too much in the weeds. But I think that there are ways that the state could have exerted some support to the hiring situation, for instance, and some of the concerns that were going on without a full-blown takeover that includes everything from top to bottom. So that's kind of where I stand on that issue.
I asked this to Representative Butts. Couldn't a middle ground just have created a board of police commissioners similar to the county, where the mayor just appoints all the commissioners? I want to be clear: the system in the county is not bereft of political influence. The current county executive has been accused of meddling in that a lot, and so was Charlie Dooley, and so I assume Steve Stanger. But, that's a pretty well-functioning police department, and I think that seemed like a good middle ground, but it didn't seem like Republicans really wanted to go there for some reason. Would that have been a good middle ground here that would have made nobody happy but may have had the best policy outcome?
Absolutely, it's a good middle ground. Again, this is the fact that the state controls our police department and the Kansas City Police Department. Granted, Kansas City just chose that on their own. That is a very highly unique situation. And of course, there could have been middle grounds. And to me, if Mayor Spencer had an opportunity to try and negotiate, that would have been, I suspect, one of the very first things that she would have started on. Let's find ways that we can work together to create a board that is going to look at both sides of the issue and operate effectively, as opposed to what we have now, where it's basically being shoved down the throats of the voters of the city of St. Louis.
Speaking of St. Louis and Kansas City, time and time again, they seem to be at the center of legislation during session, and that's led to, claims by St. Louis and Kansas City representatives saying the state is picking on these cities. What do you make of this argument?
I kind of agree. And it's not, we can start with the financial issues, but it's also social issues. It's a whole myriad. Example A, and this is granted going back a bit, but come on, we had a minimum wage here in the city of St. Louis. I remember, a business owner in my former district in the 83rd. I arranged for an interview with him with Vice News about the minimum wage. So the fact is that I believe in local control. And I think that if we believe in local control, then yes, there's no question in my mind that this area is being picked on. And I'll say it again. I think that to the extent that Republicans in Jefferson City think that it's their place to meddle in the affairs of the city of St. Louis, it's also happening in the county of St. Louis. And where the city goes, the county follows.
How would you approach bills that single out St. Louis City and County?
I'm not in. I mean, again, if we're singling out St. Louis City and County to give them more local control over and more ability to control their own destiny, well, then yes, I would be for that. But to the extent that it's continued state exertion of its supermajority, our Republican supermajority, against the will of the voters of the area, no, I cannot support that.
Do you think the city should join St. Louis County somehow through a merger or the city becoming a municipality?
I think that I think that it should be looked at, and I think that most people, reasonable people, would agree that the Better Together plan was not a very together or better plan. And I filed one of my concerns or one of my beefs about these things is that they want to put it to a vote of the entire state of Missouri. And I have a real problem with that. I filed a bill that basically consolidated a bunch of low population counties. And lo and behold, the rural folks were not very happy with me when they thought that the good folks of the city of and county of St. Louis would be able to vote on consolidating their counties. But the principle is the same. I don't think that the entire state of Missouri should be voting on what happens here in the city and the county of St. Louis. Would there need to be some statutory changes? Yes. But if the people of the city of St. Louis and the county of St. Louis decide to, have the city come in as a municipality, whatever the voters decide, I'm for.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because one of the amendments we're not going to talk about is Amendment 2, which is the Jackson County assessor being elected. And I guess we do hold the fate of that in our hands, similar to, I guess, when St. Louis County's assessor got elected. I guess you had to go statewide. That seems really weird and goofy. I got to be blunt about
I
that.
agree. And there's sometimes when it's just what you're going to have to do. I understand, I understand that. But one of the things that's gone on when you mentioned the assessor situation in Kansas City is there has been a local vote on that. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate, my hope would be that the state would follow the local vote.
An issue that's really gained momentum even in the last month or so is the construction and development of data centers across Missouri. Yes. What are your thoughts on this growing momentum of data center development?
I am not I think that my opponent and I are probably pretty similar in this. I am not fundamentally opposed to all data centers. I have, probably 6,000 or 10,000 emails on my phone, and I know that those have got to be stored somewhere. However, having said that, I'll come back to local control. I believe in local control. I think that the voters and the residents of a community are able to decide for themselves what they think is best for their community. And so that's the first thing. The other thing is that I want to see transparency. I think that, I never thought that I would say I appreciate Microsoft, but I do appreciate the fact that Microsoft has come out and said, if we're going to build a data center in your neck of the woods, you're going to know it's us. I think that the taxpayers and the ratepayers deserve to know what's going in, who's behind it, what's it's going to be used for. I also believe that there should be transparency about rates. Who's going to pay that? How is it going to impact us? What's the wholesale rate? Is that a confidential agreement? I think a big part of all of the concerns is that so much is taking place confidentially, behind closed doors. I'm not in favor of that, and I think most voters are not in favor of that. Maybe that will alleviate some concerns, maybe not all, and that's okay. But I think that the fact that we don't have transparency is a problem. There's also transparency in the environmental issues. What kind of noise is it going to create? What kind of, will the data center be burning diesel fuel, or how will they get power if the grid is overloaded? Will they be expanding the grid? Who's paying for that? Again, the devil is in the details, and I think to just say data centers are terrible in all circumstances, no, I'm not there. But they are also not okay in all circumstances.
Yeah, and I was sitting in on a Board of Aldermen meeting, which seemed to have both extremes saying about some guidelines. Like, you either had people saying any regulation is just going to kill data centers, and then you had people who are like, these regulations are not enough and we should kill data centers. And I think like the middle ground, especially for the city of St. Louis, is there's just a lot of vacant land in the city of St. Louis, and there's probably like a lot of vacant industrial land that's really not close to anybody's houses. Could you see the city of St. Louis in particular being ground zero for more data center development in the future, as opposed to St. Louis County, where I just don't know where you put a data center in St. Louis County, unless you want to build it in Lone Elk Park and displace all those poor buffalo, which, they tried. I don't think that's going to happen, basically.
Well, first of all, we know that there are several data centers that already exist in downtown St. Louis. That's a very populated area, but they are very small. That's the big difference. So when we talk, we use the word data centers, but there is a difference. There's a 20 megawatt and then there's a 120 megawatt. So having said that, do I think that there are places that a data center could go into the city? Sure. But I'm not the arbiter of that.
Yeah.
I think that the voters and the Board of Aldermen need to be the arbiters of all of that. When I say local control, I really, truly mean it. And so I think the good people of the city of St. Louis are smart people, and they can work through their elected officials to figure out how to proceed with that.
You mentioned transparency issues as well as environmental. Are there areas, do you think the state could step in on maybe some of those issues? And if so, what do you think they are?
Well, I mean, again, I think that transparency is something that the state could weigh in on. I don't know that could it or would it are two different questions. And sure, and the environmental issues as well. However, after spending 8 years in Jefferson City, after spending 2 semesters in the environmental law clinic at Washington University School of Law, my personal experience has been that when the state starts to meddle in environmental issues, it tends to go the other direction. So that does cause me pause. But again, to me, the point is if the city of St. Louis is able to create its own framework that would include environmental protections or at least environmental transparency, they should be allowed to do that without state interference.
If elected to the Missouri Senate, what would be the first 3 bills you would file as a state senator? Those are kind of seen as the first 3 big priorities for every senator.
Well, I think that honestly, it changes day by day, if you want to know the truth. And one of the big reasons for that is I'm a Democrat in a super minority. Are minority party able to get more things done in the Senate? Yes, they are. But as a Democrat in the state of Missouri, I think that when folks start talking about their priorities, it's not being very realistic. And so, I filed Medicaid expansion, I think, every single year I was in the House. Lo and behold, it took an initiative petition before it happened. Would I continue to file bills like that? Of course that I would. I filed the pink tax, I think, in 2016, and it didn't happen until 2025. And I still would not have voted for it because it came with the capital gains, with the capital gains tax removal. So I care very, very deeply about health care. I care very, very deeply about workers' rights. I care very, very deeply about local control. But do those things manifest themselves as a separately filed bill that gets passed? No, they do not.
Then what are your priorities then going into the Senate?
It's a defensive game. So again, and I know that it's not what folks want to hear. It's probably not what you guys want to hear. But that's just the fact of the matter. So for me to say, well, I would like to, if I could wave a magic wand and reinstate capital gains tax, why, my gosh, that would be the first thing I can do. But that's just it's not possible.
Well, defense is a priority. So then, what would be things that then you would want to play defense on?
Next year, it's funding. It's all going to be about funding. I think that we are all very concerned about what that's going to look like, particularly in healthcare realms. I'm very concerned about what that's going to look like for low-income folks, for folks on Medicaid. We have a constitutional expansion, which creates some difficulties or some oddness, I guess, but it's all about the dollars and where those dollars are going to go and what we can do to protect services. Public education is another one of those places. We're already defunding now to the tune of $190 million in general revenue on top of $118 million in unrealized lottery money. So that's another place. The fight is all going to be budget next year.
So let's talk about constitutional amendments that will be on the August and 1 November ballot one. Sarah didn't have this one on. Amendment 1, I imagine that you're for that. I really haven't found anybody that is for or who is against reauthorizing the parks and soil tax. I just want to make clear about that.
Yes, and isn't that a lovely bipartisan situation where we have everyone, folks on both sides or all sides of the political spectrum that support our conservation and our parks? So yes, I'm supportive of that.
Amendment 4 would require initiative petition constitutional changes to pass in 8 out of 8 congressional districts and get a majority. What's your take on that?
Absolutely not. And for anybody that says that that's a good idea, I would like them to answer this. How okay are they with the thousands of people that would have been dead between 2020's expansion of Medicaid and today if we didn't have an initiative petition process? So I hear that there are some politicals that want to say, oh, we should support it because it will force Democrats to get elected or force people to choose. We know that that's not been the case for more than 20 years, and there are really important things that happen via IP, and I think that it's important that we be able to continue to do that. And more importantly, the fact that the General Assembly has set it up in a way so that what's good for thee is not good for them is not okay.
The Republican-led chamber has been trying to pass kind of a version of this proposed amendment for years and ultimately settled kind of on this version. I mean, what do you make of this particular version? How do you think it compares with others?
Well, I mean, this is the one that's in front of us, so that's what I care about. Is it's the one that made it across the finish line. And the bottom line is, the fact of the matter is literally one person in the entire state could make something that 70 or 80 or 90% of the rest of the state agrees with not happen. That's just not okay. And the fact is that the General Assembly bills proposed by or propositions proposed by the General Assembly don't have to play by the same rules is crazy to me.
So Amendment 5 would allow the legislature to expand or raise sales and use taxes as a means to get rid of the income tax. What is your take on that?
Absolutely not. But and for a whole lot of reasons. But the biggest thing is that it removes all of the existing constitutional guardrails we have about the General Assembly imposing taxes. So if you want low taxes, I'm not sure how this ballot measure would help you achieve that. Because you're just basically saying, okay, folks in Jeff City, you guys figure out exactly what is going to be taxed and to what level and how it's going to be balanced out against other things. I see it pitting local communities against their state. I mean, it's fraught with issues. And so I am fundamentally opposed to it. And I also have not taken a red cent from Rex Sinquefield, who is one of the men who has been trying to get this done for decades.
What do you make of the argument that states without an income tax are better off in the long run economically?
Well, let's see. We can start with Texas. I actually have a son that, has lived in Texas and owns a home there, and he pays outrageous taxes in other, he doesn't pay an income tax, but he has lots of high taxes in other areas. So the bottom line is the money is needed. If you want roads, if you want police, if you want public education, if you want the basic services that government's going to provide, the money comes from someplace. Texas has oil. Missouri does not. We don't have tourism like other states do, Florida or Tennessee for that matter. So I have a sister that lives in Washington State, and they also have tech money. They have other avenues rather than just expanding what regular taxpayers are paying.
So Amendment 3 will be on the ballot in November, and that would replace the 2024 version of Amendment 3, which legalized abortion up until fetal viability, with an abortion ban with the exception of medical emergencies, fatal fetal abnormalities, and rape and incest up to 12 weeks of pregnancy. It also, as we'll talk in a minute, would ban gender-affirming care for minors. I think you've made it pretty clear you're not for this.
Right.
So I don't feel like we need to beat that dead horse. Are you worried, though, that it's going to pass because it has the gender-affirming care ban on
Absolutely. it? I think that it is a wedge issue. And, of course, I mean, even if it didn't have that aspect of things, I would be concerned. And I think we all should be concerned. Those that support abortion rights and reproductive rights should be concerned and make sure that they get out to vote. Even those exceptions in the abortion aspect of that measure are not okay. If anybody that knows a victim of sexual assault understands that reporting is difficult and often does not happen. And at the time that the offense occurs, you don't know that you're pregnant. Incest is a whole other ball of wax or can of worms, so to speak, where I don't know that I can expect a 14-year-old, or we as a society should expect a 14-year-old to be reporting incest before they find out that they're pregnant. And even afterwards, I think that folks or young women would be reluctant or scared or have issues with that. So I don't support the bill on the abortion level, and I do have concerns about the wedge issue, so to speak.
So, okay, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of people who are opposed to abortion rights and who feel that abortion is morally reprehensible to them, I could see them continually putting things on the ballot in perpetuity because they're not going to find it convincing that just because there's a successful election to legalize abortion, they should just give up and just deal with it. Like, do you expect there to be like new versions of this Amendment 3 in perpetuity if this one fails?
Yes.
Like the legislature will just keep putting different things on.
Yes.
So
Just
what
as,
does that
just as we saw,
mean? What does that mean for abortion rights policy?
Just as we saw, I mean, after Roe was passed, I mean,
Yeah.
this has been an issue for 50 some years. So, I believe that it will continue to be an issue, and how that all manifests, I don't have that crystal ball. I don't think that any of us do. But I don't think that those that support abortion rights are going to give up, and I don't think that those who are opposed to it will either.
This is kind of a politically wonky question, but what do you make of the fact that Governor Kehoe put amendments 4 and 5 on the August ballot, but chose to leave 3 on the November ballot?
I can only assume that he's got some polling data that says that it's going to be more successful for his desires in November. But I can't speak to what is in his mind, but that's my suspicion.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for coming on the show to talk about your candidacy for Missouri's 4th Senate District. Politically Speaking is a product of St. Louis Public Radio, which is a part of the University of Missouri St. Louis. You can read and listen to all of our reporting at stlpr.org. All right. And Gina Mitten, where can people find more information about your campaign?
www.ginamitten.com or Facebook, Instagram. I don't have all those handles off the top of my head. My apologies. But you will find them all on my website, which is ginamitten.com.
All right. That's all for now. Until next time, so long. Politically Speaking is produced by Jason Rosenbaum, Rachel Lippman, and me, Sarah Kellogg. The show is edited by Fred Ehrlich. Read all of our coverage at stlpr.org. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Politically Speaking by searching the term Politically Speaking on Apple Podcasts.
Support comes from Mosby Building Arts, providing exterior solutions for homes with faded, cracked, or outdated siding. Details at callmosby.com.